Our episodes deal with serious and often distressing incidents. Listener discretion is advised. What happens when a person goes missing? In normal circumstances, someone close would notice, and their first instinct would be to call or to try to find out why that person is not where they are meant to be. If they are unable to track them down and begin to worry that something untoward may be at play, they would contact the police. The police would then investigate and assist in tracking down that person. But what happens if those close to the person choose not to report them missing? What happens if their community doesn't notice they aren't around anymore? What happens if the entire system that should check on someone's welfare fails to notice that anything is wrong? On October 28, 2016, a call was made by Edward Cairney and Avril Jones to the local police station to report Margaret Fleming missing.
I'm Jess, and this is Skinwalker.
Margaret Fleming was born in Port Glasgow, Inverkip. Originally a fishing village named Newark, the area's name was changed to Newport Glasgow in the mid-1600s, then subsequently shortened to just Port Glasgow in the 1700s, as the area became a remote port for its larger neighbour, Glasgow, due to the struggles of large ships navigating the shallow River Clyde in Glasgow's city centre. Port Glasgow was home to dry docks that berthed ships importing tobacco, sugar, rum and cotton. Trade prospered in Port Glasgow and the town grew in tandem, then fell in equal measure as the shipping trade declined within Scotland. By 2011, the area had a remaining population of around 15,000 people within roughly 5 square kilometres. The gritty feel of the shipyards and industrial labour remains in the town. However, the declining fortunes of the area has left old shipyards empty in its wake and having little available work in the area. Margaret attended Slaymuir Primary School and showed early signs of learning difficulties. She struggled with reading and writing and required additional support throughout primary school. This continued as she went on to attend Port Glasgow High School. Margaret was known to be a quiet child by those around her in school, and teachers often had to encourage her to join in on activities and group work. In a 1995 report from her teacher Elizabeth Brown, she wrote, "Margaret Fleming has moderate learning difficulties. She works fairly well to her ability, but needs written instructions set out simply and gone over verbally." She later reflected, quote, "If you left Margaret on her own, she would do very little. You had to prod her to do the work. Her marks were all at the very bottom end of the school." Margaret had struggled to make friends throughout school. However, her close relationship with her father had meant that she was not desperately trying to make new friends. In 1993, while aged only 12 years old, her father Derek and mother Margaret divorced after 20 years of marriage. Margaret moved into her grandparents' home along with her father that same year. Her mother took little to do with her. Derek Fleming was a tradesman and had retrained as a lawyer, aiming to make a better life for himself and Margaret. Elaine Moore, a teacher at Port Glasgow High, stated, "She was quite isolated. Her and her dad were a wee unit. She was concerned about him, and he was concerned about her. Throughout 1995, Derek Fleming had been in and out of hospital, but had chosen not to tell Margaret that anything was wrong due to his thoughts about how any disclosure would affect her. Derek opted to cover up that he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. His condition was deteriorating fast, and Margaret was aware that something was not quite adding up concerning her father. Due to the stress, Margaret had become challenging to deal with and was arguing with her grandparents regularly. On October 20, 1995, Margaret's mother organised a meeting with Inverkip Council's social work office, hoping to give her a change in perspective and curb her recent behavioural issues. During the meeting, the social worker questioned Margaret to get a greater understanding of her thoughts and feelings. The subsequent report stated that, quote, "Margaret does not know why her father is in hospital and is afraid it is something serious." The social worker noted the strong bond with her father and the notion that the child felt rejected by her mother. Summing up at the end of the report, it states, quote, "I feel like Margaret is a rather lonely, isolated girl who is living with elderly grandparents. Margaret appears to be surrounded by a great deal of uncertainty and ill health." If the meeting was planned by Margaret Sr. as a way of calming Margaret, then her plan seemed severely misguided. Only 5 days after the meeting at the social work office, Derek Fleming lost his battle with cancer, leaving a devastated Margaret living with the same grandparents whom she had been having the issues with. In the months running up to Derek's death, he had gotten engaged to a woman he had been seeing named Jean McSherry from the East End of Glasgow. In the short period they had been together, Jean had formed a healthy relationship with Margaret. In her words, she had taught Margaret to eat healthily, cook, and help with beauty and fashion. The eventual plan for Derek and Jean was to get their own place together, where Margaret could move in with them and they could live together as a family. Jean was well aware that Derek was the rock in Margaret's life, and vice versa, and that a relationship would not work without everyone being united. After Derek's death, this vision became a distant dream. Jean had not been a stepmother to Margaret, meaning she had no legal right to custody. This was despite the fact she was fond of the girl, and Derek himself believed in the run-up to his death that his parents were too old to provide the care and attention Margaret required. In short, he felt they would not be able to look after a girl of her needs. Margaret Sr. continued to have limited dealings with her daughter, and by this point they had little to no relationship whatsoever. Derek himself had stated before he died that in the event that her mother or Jean would not be able to take custody of Margaret, he would prefer for his friends, Edward Cairney and Avril Jones, to take care of her as their own. Initially, Margaret returned to live with her mother, but their arduous relationship meant that fights were regular, and their time together was not spent happily. Margaret Sr. reported that her daughter would physically beat her at the slightest questioning of what she had been doing. Another visit to the social work office of Inverkip Council was arranged by Margaret Sr. After they attended, social worker Denise Monroe stated, "Margaret was quite a naive girl, quite vulnerable, quiet, lonely, sad, and did not have many friends. When I went to their house to pick up Margaret, I would have a conversation with her mum, who found it difficult. She had lived on her own and had an adolescent girl who was missing her dad. Edward Cairney had spoken to Margaret Sr. at the funeral of Derek to say that he was happy to oblige Derek's wishes and look after the young Margaret. Margaret Sr. thanked Edward, but continued to look after her daughter by herself. However, after continuing to struggle with her daughter, Margaret Sr. elected to take Edward up on his offer to help look after the young Margaret. The 10-mile journey from Port Glasgow to the home of Edward and Avril was short, but the change in scenery was stark. Inverkip is a small village on the west coast of Scotland. Although close to the shipyards of Greenock and Port Glasgow, it has a more remote feel to it. The small village centre has exceptionally narrow pavements and terraced housing built directly onto the side of the road. Edward and Avril had a house large enough to host additional guests. They resided in Seacroft, a 5-bedroom bungalow situated on the banks of Inverkip Bay. The house boasted views across the Firth of Clyde to the Noon and the Ellen, as well as access to the wooded area beside their home for walks and to explore the local area. The following year was a more settled period of Margaret's life, consisting of spending time with her mother in Port Glasgow and with Edward and Avril in Inverkip. However, in 1997, an incident took place between Margaret Sr. and Edward and Avril. While her daughter stayed with the pair, Margaret Sr. decided that her daughter had been gone from her home long enough. She travelled to Inverkip to tell Margaret it was time to come home. A dispute followed between Margaret Sr. and Edward Cairney, in which Margaret claimed she had been attacked and assaulted. Margaret further claimed that Edward pinned her against a cupboard and had spat in her face. Edward Cairney then forced young Margaret to come downstairs and asked her in front of her mother where she wanted to live. Margaret Sr. said of the events, "I think she was a bit nervous and she turned around and said she wanted to stay there. There was nothing I could do about it." After calling the police regarding the incident, a welfare check was made at the home, but was never progressed after the attending officer had spoken to Margaret. A typed letter soon followed, which Margaret Sr. received stating it was from her daughter, which went on to say that she no longer wished to see her mother. Margaret Sr. stopped visiting and relinquished her duties as a mother thereafter, in the belief that she was not wanted in her daughter's life. Edward and Avril had by now taken complete care of Margaret and made the application to become her full-time carers. In doing so, they began to receive the incapacity benefit payments for her, which were paid into Avril Jones' bank account. Margaret herself was noticeable around the village. A new face was always noted by residents, but while under the care of Cairney and Jones, Margaret had decided to shave her head, which may have made her presence even more marked. Cairney and Jones invited friends over for lunches and barbecues, and friends notably mentioned the excellent relationship between Margaret and Edward. In March of 1999, the family of Avril Jones gathered for her parent Ruby wedding anniversary. A photograph from the evening shows a 19-year-old Margaret, now with her hair grown long, stood with Jones's mother and father as they celebrated. As the years passed with Margaret under their care, friends and family had begun to notice the trio become reclusive, and the barbecues and gatherings had all but stopped. Despite their reclusiveness, there were no concerns over any of the trio's welfare. However, on October 28, 2016, police were asked to attend the Seacroft home by the social work office. a recent request made by Avril Jones for an enhanced carer's allowance had flagged up some worries. The enhanced allowance would have entitled her to more money for the work of taking care of Margaret. However, some of the information put on the application form had raised eyebrows. When raised eyebrows gave way to investigation, the social work office noticed an incredible failing. There had been an almost complete lack of visits and contact with Margaret herself over the previous 18 years of her stay with Avril and Edward. One visit was made to the property on June 18, 2012, whereby an employee for the Department of Work and Pensions had gone to speak to Margaret. Avril Jones had answered the door and told the employee that Margaret would not see her due to her mental health. The employee had noted on her visit log that the house was in a poor state. There looked to be poor living conditions at the property, and also upon investigation, Margaret was not registered with any general practitioner, meaning she did not have access to medical treatment. This was then referred back to the social work office to be followed up. However, as Miss Jones did not consent to the referral, it was marked in the report. Referrer did not ascertain client's permission to make a referral. Therefore, no further action can be taken in relation to this. And no further action was taken. No follow-up visit occurred, and no further visits ever took place until the police attended Seacroft in October of 2016. As police completed their welfare check on October 28, 2016, Miss Jones once again answered the door and had advised that Margaret was unavailable to speak with them. Edward Cairney appeared and stated that Margaret had just left and she must have walked past them. The officers attending stated this wouldn't have been possible, as an officer had been stationed out the back and they could confirm that no one had left the property. The decision was then made to check in at another date. However, that plan was no longer necessary. Later that same day, police received a call from Edward Cairney and Avril Jones to state that Margaret had gone missing and they were unable to track her down. Introducing Peebles for the People, a true crime podcast brought to you by the Underdog Podcast Network. On Easter morning in 1994, at the D&W convenience store in the rural upstate NY town of New Haven, 18-year-old Heidi Allen was seen for the very last time. Where was she taken and why? Who was responsible? In the immediate aftermath of Heidi Allen's kidnapping, police quickly identified Gary Thibodeau as the prime suspect, and even though there was no physical or forensic evidence and no eyewitnesses linking him to the crime, they were able to secure a conviction. As Gary sat in prison, these central questions, where was Heidi and why was she taken, still lingered. This is a story of a young girl taken and presumably murdered in the prime of her life. It is the story of a justice system that can oftentimes fail the innocent people brought before it. It is the story of violent men with drug money and scores to settle. And it is the story of police departments protecting themselves at the expense of the truth. This is Peebles for the People. Peebles for the People will be available on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your favourite shows from July 6th. Subscribe today to make sure you don't miss an episode. After receiving the call from the residents at Seacroft, police began to investigate the recent movements of Margaret in an attempt to trace her. Detective Superintendent Paul Livingston was placed in charge of the investigation team. The first port of call for officers was to speak to her carers, the same two who had made the call to report her missing, Edward Cairney and Avril Jones. Upon entering the Seacroft home on November 1, 2016, officers noted the mess and junk that was strewn across the floor. Officers had to clear a path to walk through areas of the house and discovered extensive dog hair and dog feces, which were responsible for the strong odour they had encountered after arriving. The living room was set up with 2 armchairs facing the TV. As they searched the attic area where Margaret's bedroom was located, they were able to see that the internal walls had been knocked down, along with the carpet being ripped up and the floor left threadbare underneath. Odder than this was the fact the police were unable to see a bed anywhere in the attic where Margaret would have slept. Cairney and Jones were seen as obstructive by police, as they were unable to give great detail in assisting them with finding Margaret. When asked for a recent photo, the pair were unable to find anything and were only able to produce an old photograph from 1999. Very little items belonging to Margaret were found in the house, with only a few pieces of clothing and a toy penguin. The Seacroft property was so crammed full of items and boxes belonging to the pair that a wall at the rear of the house had to be removed so that officers were able to make space for their investigation. Police Scotland then set up a mobile laboratory outside of the home to enable them to prioritise and check items. Officers went room by room through the home to clear items and examine the rooms with luminol as they searched for traces of blood. Detective Superintendent Livingston said, "It was so detailed. They recovered 2 scabs from a bedroom. We examined them for DNA, and it came back that they were both Avril's." When checking with the social work office and the incapacity benefits for Margaret, police were able to see that this had been paid uninterrupted into the bank account of Avril Jones for 18 years. However, a disclosure was made that although these payments were being made, no one from social work had any contact or had seen Margaret Fleming in person over those 18 years. During this time frame, Avril Jones had received a total of £182,000 for her care for Margaret. The items given by Cairney and Jones contained no DNA trace of Margaret. Luckily for police, a routine blood sample taken after she was born had been held by the NHS. Blood samples are not always retained by the National Health Service, but fortunately for police, Margaret's had been. This allowed them to cross-check with unidentified bodies across the UK. However, there was no match. Along with these items, the pair had produced comprehensive letters reportedly sent to them by Margaret shortly after she left their home. The first of these letters was sent from Carlisle on January 9, 2000. Another 2 followed on January 13, headed as being sent from the Regent Palace Hotel in London. Police had recruited the help of Margaret's old English teacher from Port Glasgow High School. Jacqueline Cahill had taught Margaret during her most crucial years of schooling before completing her standard grade tests in the years of 1994 to 1996. She remembered Margaret well and stated she had required a support teacher to assist. When asked by police if the letters could have been sent from Margaret, Jacqueline Cahill advised them these were not letters Margaret would have been capable of writing. In her opinion, Margaret struggled to write up to 100 words and had a reading level around that of an 8-year-old. Richard Jones, the brother of Avril Jones, when questioned, was able to recall seeing Margaret on a specific date, that of December 17, 1999. He recalled vividly Margaret playing with his 2 young children in the garden as he moved into his new home in the area. Florence Jones, the mother of Avril, however, could not recall seeing Margaret at Christmas dinner, which was spent with the whole family in 1999. She remembered that her daughter had told her a story that Margaret had run off with a traveller and hadn't returned at the beginning of the year 2000. It was also noted in several witness statements that thereafter, Jones and Cairney became even more secluded from the family, and the Seacroft home had begun to fall into disrepair. Rosemary Connolly, a friend of Jones, stated that she had never once seen Margaret, despite regular social visits to the house over the intervening years. This potential revelation cascaded. Speaking to more neighbours of the pair, police were unable to gather any further information as they were met with confused faces as neighbours struggled to remember ever seeing the girl, period, let alone having seen her in the past few years. A subsequent search with sniffer dogs led police to believe there may be signs of body decomposition in the back garden of the property. The decision was made to excavate the garden as they explored the possibility there may be traces of Margaret if she had come to harm. Drone footage taken on December 15 showed the scale of the search at the home, as the entire back garden had been dug up as no stone was left unturned. This search continued for 5 months, with officers discovering bone fragments. However, they had been so badly charred that it was impossible to conclude if they were human or animal bone. Officers searching inside the house did manage to turn up a Christmas card book. This was a diary used by Avril Jones, in which she marked the names of those whom she had sent a Christmas card. Margaret's name was on the list and had a tick against the years 1997, 1998, and the last tick against her name in 1999. If Margaret had been alive past 1999, Cairney and Jones were having a significant problem in proving it. This same lack of evidence cut both ways, however, as the police found it incredibly challenging to find any details on Margaret's life for the past 17 years. Police Scotland took the decision to launch a proof of life investigation. This type of investigation was used to determine the identified movements of an individual and use these as proof that a person had been alive within a timescale, or if they had even existed at all. The investigating team was set to task on creating an electronic calendar of Margaret's life. The team contacted every police force, health board, doctor's surgery, and local authority in the UK. They also contacted banks and financial institutions to check if Margaret had ever applied for credit. It was quickly established that Margaret Fleming had not appeared on anyone's radar since the sighting by Richard Jones in December of 1999. The only people who had claimed to have seen her were Edward Cairney and Avril Jones. The electronic calendar created by police started with Margaret's date of birth and ended with the date of her reported disappearance, October 28, 2016, and recorded all of her major milestones known to them. Further interviews with family members flagged up some concerning reports, including one incident Richard Jones recalled from a visit to Seacroft in April of 1999. It was the morning after his parents' ruby wedding anniversary, and as he entered the property, he found that Margaret was locked in her bedroom with cardboard tubes on her arms and was said to have been making a chilling wailing sound while dragging her fingers down the window. Richard felt decidedly uneasy, but without questioning his sister and her partner, he shuffled his family back to their car outside and decided not to stay. In total, police took over 500 statements from people who had known the family and Margaret. Not one of these statements was able to assist with the timeline of Margaret's life from December 1999 to October 2016. Detective Superintendent Livingston stated, "There have been no independent sightings, no work records, GP appointments, dealings with social workers, contact with friends, family, or anyone else for that matter." Police also received no assistance from Cairney and Jones, who in their eyes had not acted in the way expected of someone who wanted to find a missing person. Searches of the Firth of Clyde also proved fruitless, as no discoveries were made. Almost a year after Margaret's disappearance, in August of 2017, with investigations ongoing, an inspection by Inverkip Council concluded with the Seacroft home being declared unfit for human habitation and a demolition order issued. Despite this, Cairney and Jones continued to live in the house, with rooms crammed full of junk and a hole in the wall left behind by police covered up with only a tarpaulin sheet. Then finally, on October 8, 2017, Edward Cairney and Avril Jones broke their self-imposed silence. In an interview with BBC Scotland, Cairney and Jones sat in the living room of their home with reporter Suzanne Allen. Edward had a scruffy beard and sat with confidence, while Avril sat upright and tight-lipped, allowing Edward to do the talking. Asked about the day of her disappearance, Edward began to tell a story that himself, Avril and Margaret were returning from a walk to Weems Bay, an area further down the coast from Inverkip. As they neared the home, Margaret had caught a glimpse of flashing police lights and had begun to run off. Edward shouted her back as she stated they were coming for her. According to Edward, Margaret had what he described as a, quote, persecution complex. He was then able to calm her down by telling her the police will be attending an accident on the road. Once in the home, Jones answered to a knock at the door. Cairney states that the policeman who entered was hysterical and screeching, "Where is Margaret?" He then spotted Cairney standing in the hallway and directed the question to him, "Where is Margaret Fleming?" Edward responded to say, "She is here, what do you want her for?" But as he turned around to bring her into the hallway, she was gone. Edward Cairney remained certain of the fact that Margaret had been able to walk right through the police, who had been on either side of the house, without being seen. When asked to describe Margaret, viewers of the interview may have been expecting Cairney and Jones to show a more emotional side of their love and affection. Cairney instead stated to the reporter, "She is short, fat, dirty. She would not clean herself." The reporter then asked Cairney, "Have you seen Margaret since?" To which he responds, "Yes, she's been here once. Not to the house, but we've seen her once." He said this was within a month of her disappearance and that she had cleaned herself up. Her behaviour was also improved according to Cairney, as she had stopped the shouting and bawling that he had experienced. Cairney stated that further contact was made by phone, and he advised police that Margaret was in London and told them where she could be found, but the police did nothing about it. The reporter then asked, "And where has she been within the last year?" Cairney responded, "She's been in Poland, also London. I've got no idea how many other places she has been or goes to, because she has become a gangmaster." Cairney then asks the reporter if she knows what a gangmaster is. When she offered no explanation, Cairney went on to explain that, quote, "In spite of her difficulties, she has become a person who recruits and hires out agricultural workers." The reporter then asks, "Has she become a gangmaster, or has she become a slave to a gangmaster?" Cairney replied, "No, she has become a gangmaster. She is hiring people." When he was asked if Margaret had told him what she is doing, he instead states, "We knew from people in the area around her, because obviously she did not disappear, and we would not try to get her." This, Cairney implied, explained the lack of effort that the police had noted in the couple in tracking Margaret down. Cairney did, however, state that despite giving all of this detail to police, they had chosen not to believe their version of events. When asked how they felt about the situation, if they are worried or possibly annoyed at her, Cairney spoke before his partner, stating, "We love her." Jones echoed the sentiment, saying, "We're not annoyed at her because we understand she is afraid of authority." The couple are then asked, if Margaret was watching this interview right now, what would they say to her? The camera slowly zooms into the face of Avril Jones as she blankly stares at the reporter. Her mouth twitches as her eyes quickly dart to the ground before Cairney breaks the silence, stating, "If she is involved in this other business, then I wouldn't want to know her." Pressed as to whether the business he talks of is relating to her becoming a gangmaster, Cairney states, "No, the drugs." "18 days after this interview, on October 2017, Police Scotland executed an arrest warrant for both Edward Cairney and Avril Jones for the murder of Margaret Fleming. They were apprehended during a suspected getaway. The pair were caught at Glasgow Central Station, ready to board a night train to London. In their possession they had £3,000 in cash, as well as a key for a safety deposit box in London. Despite having two suspects in custody, police had still been unable to find any proof of Margaret's life since her last sighting in 1999. The only people who claimed to have seen her and had contact were Cairney and Jones. In the police interview, Edward Cairney was asked several questions. The interviewing officer asked, "Is Margaret Fleming dead?" Cairney replied, "No comment." He is then asked, "Eddie, are you involved in her disappearance and murder?" Cairney again replied, "No comment." Feeling that Cairney may be refusing to answer any questions, the officer then asked, "Did you murder Margaret Fleming?" Once again, Cairney's reply was no comment, as he looked the officer in the eyes. The interviewing officer then states, "I'm not sure if it's a nervous thing, but again, such a crucial question, and you are smirking." An argument then ensued between Cairney and the officer, where he states that he may be smirking at the manufactured sincerity of the officer. The officer replies to state he will show no sincerity towards him. In total, Edward Cairney replied no comment 37 times to police during his questioning, refusing to answer one question. The pair appeared at Greenock Sheriff Court the following day, October 27, and made no plea. They were remanded in custody, with a trial date to be set. In October of 2018, Cairney and Jones appeared at the High Court in Glasgow, accused of murdering Margaret, and of fraudulently claiming £182,000 in benefits. Both had entered pleas of not guilty. The trial was halted in its third week. Judge Lord Matthews said, "I will desert the trial pro loco e tempore. As a result of circumstances we can't proceed. It is highly unfortunate to all this has arisen." No explanation was given as to why this trial had collapsed, but Lord Matthews stated it was no fault of either the prosecution or the defence. Ian McSporran QC for the prosecution backed the decision, as he wished for a new indictment to be brought against the pair. In April of 2019, the trial was reset for the High Court in Glasgow. Once again, the charges brought against the pair were that they had murdered Margaret sometime between December 18, 1999 and January 5, 2000, along with fraudulently claiming benefits by pretending she was still alive. This time, with the case gaining public interest, a Glasgow-based film company, Firecrest Films, were given permission by the Procurator Fiscal, the Crown Office, and Scotland's judiciary, Lord Carloway, to film the trial. Edward and Avril were both made aware that the trial would be documented. Jones had been reluctant to appear on camera and had first refused, but this was overruled by her lawyer. Cairney and Jones had chosen to take separate representation in their case. Cairney was represented by Thomas Ross QC, while Jones was represented by Ian Duguid QC. The defence believed and argued that a body must be found to be able to convict the pair with murder. This is not an absolute defence in Scotland, as there have been similar murder trials, such as those of Susan Pilley and Arlene Fraser, whereby a judge and jury have deemed evidence sufficient to try and convict for murder without the recovery of the body itself. Prosecutors believed they had enough evidence in this vein to prove that Margaret was murdered by the pair in the dock, and the murder itself covered up by the same pair. The key witnesses for the prosecution were Avril's mother and brother, who recalled their memories of the last sightings of Margaret, along with the care she had received at the hands of the two in the dock. Richard Jones had been able to assist police in building the timeline for events running up to her last sighting. Avril Jones' cousin also took to the stand to testify that she had visited the home on many occasions, even staying over on some of these, and she had not seen Margaret. In 2007, two of Avril's nieces had stayed at the Seacroft home for a period of 6 months. Neither recalled meeting nor ever seeing Margaret. The jury were told of the mistreatment of Margaret, that she would have her arms covered with cardboard tubes and her head shaved, as well as often going without food and being locked in her room. During the trial, it was revealed that Cairney and Jones had made a trip to London in the year 2000. It was put to the jury that during this trip, they had wrote the 3 letters which were supposedly sent to them by Margaret. On another trip to London in 2017, Edward Cairney claimed to have met with Margaret. Officers were sent to London to check CCTV footage of Tottenham Court Road, as directed by their senior investigating officer. The only footage found was of Edward Cairney walking with the assistance of 2 walking sticks along the road and back again. Defence QC Thomas Ross played footage from the police interview, in which Edward Cairney in fact stated he had seen Margaret while walking along Charing Cross Road. Detective Sergeant Carson, who had made the trip to London, then admitted on the stand that no CCTV of Charing Cross Road had been checked. Seeing a flaw in the evidence against Cairney's London claim, Thomas Ross QC said to Detective Constable Haggerty, "You didn't have 100% record of his movements?" The detective replied, "That's correct." Prosecutors moved on to the testimony of Margaret's former teachers, who agreed that the writing style of the letters were far too advanced for Margaret, and she would have been incapable of writing these herself. Thomas Ross QC for the defence rubbished these claims, asking the teachers on the stand how they could remember the writing style of a girl they taught over 20 years ago. He also asked, was it beyond the realms of possibility that her writing had improved since they had known her? Jacqueline Cahill denied this, stating to the court, she had literacy difficulties, she struggled to put pen to paper. Police Constable Jonathan Gilmore also took to the stand and stated that while he was stationed at the house as investigators searched the premises, Cairney had predicted in front of him that the case would end in a murder charge. Thomas Ross QC said to the jury in explanation of his client's comments, "Looking at it in isolation, it sounds very significant, but it started with 2 routine cops coming to check, then another 2 cops, then 2 CID, then a dog unit, then somebody talking about helicopters and divers. When you have gone from 2 cops turning up for a missing person to your house full of about 15 cops and saying this is going to end up a murder charge, it was in the context of the police inquiry. However, it was countered by the question of why Edward Cairney would be talking about murder if his version of events that she was now a gangmaster in Poland was correct. Throughout the court case, Avril Jones remained silent, a character trait that led the media to brand her as emotionless. Ian Duguid, Avril's legal representative, later reflected that her personality was reserved and she didn't show any emotions, stating that how she came across in the TV interview with Suzanne Allen was how she was day to day. Edward Cairney, however, did not remain quiet in court. Ian McSporran stated that on one occasion, Cairney had been smart enough to get up extremely close to him to tell him, quote, "You'll be dead before me." McSporran was able to laugh this off, saying, "Well, Mr. Cairney, I probably will, so that's the sequel. Who dies first?" Cairney had known that if he was extremely close to McSporran, then the microphones inside the courtroom would not have picked up what he said. Another outburst by Cairney took place while McSporran was giving evidence. Cairney interrupted to call the QC a, quote, "clown." McSporran, again in good humour, stated, "I have been called worse." In the documentary, The Disappearance of Margaret Fleming, aired by the BBC, shows one scene of Edward Cairney making his way to the High Court by himself in his wheelchair. As he struggles to get across the road, Ian McSporran approaches him to ask if he can help him across. Cairney agrees as McSporran steps onto the road to stop the traffic to allow him across. As Cairney reaches the pavement on the other side, he continues on his journey, no longer acknowledging the QC. Ian McSporran said of the encounter, "I thought I'd get some credit for that, but I don't remember him saying thank you." The trial lasted for 7 weeks due to the extensive presentation of evidence. However, the judgment of guilt took the jury only 3.5 hours. Edward Cairney and Avril Jones were found guilty of the murder of Margaret Fleming. Following from the first judgment, Avril Jones was also found unanimously guilty of fraudulently claiming £182,000 in benefits for Margaret Fleming while pretending she was still alive. On July 17, 2019, Judge Lord Matthews sentenced the pair to life imprisonment with a non-parole period set at 14 years. In his statement, Lord Matthews said, "You were also convicted of covering up her death in various ways for almost 18 years. You were only caught after an investigation was prompted by extravagant information which you, Avril Jones, provided in an application for benefits." Believing that the motive for their crimes was financial, Lord Matthews claimed the pair had breached the trust placed in them of a young girl put in their care. Also making reference to the web of lies they had created and directing his words to them that the way they had spoke of this young girl after her disappearance was cruel. After the completion of the trial in January 2020, Inverkip Council announced they would be carrying out a significant case review to examine exactly how Margaret Fleming had managed to slip through the cracks of the social care system. The investigation is expected to take around 15 months before Inverkip Council will present their findings in the hope that no one else will be forgotten about in the way Margaret Fleming had been. The documentary, The Disappearance of Margaret Fleming, aired on BBC on January 7, 2020, and increased interest in the case, as well as highlighting the evil acts of Edward Cairney and Avril Jones. Margaret Fleming's body has never been recovered, with the only people knowing what fate she truly came to being the people in charge of her care in her last known years. The officer who led the investigation, Detective Superintendent Paul Livingston, put out a plea for answers in 2019. Margaret's family and friends will never know just what happened to her, and they have been denied the right to pay their final respects to her at her funeral. I would say to Cairney and Jones, if you have a scrap of decency, you will give the answers to the questions that Margaret's family deserve. I am willing to meet either of them so that they can tell me in order to provide some kind of comfort to her family and allow them to put her to rest finally.
Dear Home, we need a change. A room evolution. We need HomeSense. A new store where one bold piece can change your whole place. Like a leather sofa built for beauty and binge watching. With endless discoveries, I'll always bring you something pretty, or cool, or pretty cool. Want a hand-woven rug? Game-changing savings mean the answer is yes. I'm going now. There are new stores in Carl Place, New York, and Toms River, New Jersey. Love you. HomeSense. This changes everything.
Your favorite things feel made for you. Your education should too. University of Maryland Global Campus, formerly University of Maryland University College, was made to serve the military and working adults like you. Today, we continue that tradition by offering frequent start dates so you can get started with convenient online learning that fits your schedule, by recognizing your accomplishments with credits you can earn for what you know, by providing no-cost online resources replacing most textbooks because a college education can fit your budget too, and with no SAT or GRE required for most programs. University of Maryland Global Campus, made for you. Get started on your undergraduate degree or certificate with University of Maryland Global Campus. Classes start March 17th. With virtual support services and no-cost digital materials replacing textbooks for most courses, UMGC can help you achieve your goals. Visit umgc.edu. That's umgc.edu. Certified to operate in Virginia by Chev.